The wind sliced through the desolate streets of New York, sharp as regret. 6-year-old Emily pressed herself tighter against the crumbling wall of a forgotten building, her tiny frame barely wrapped in a worn blue blanket, dotted with yellow stars. Her breath ghosted in the air, trembling like her limbs. The blanket was her last thread to a world that no longer existed, a gift from her mother stitched with love and the letter E. It still held the fading scent of vanilla lotion and home. The night was cruel, colder than the last, and she had no voice left to cry with. Since her parents vanished beneath collapsed beams and flames, she hadn't spoken a word. The system meant to care for her had become another kind of prison, and she had escaped it in silence. Alone now, she drifted from alley to alley, her world reduced to concrete and cold. Then she heard it, a sound other than the wind, faint, raw, alive, a whimper. Emily turned her head slowly, eyes scanning the shadows. There, slumped in the darkness, was a massive German shepherd. The dog was shaking violently, its ribs sharply visible under filthy fur. Its eyes, intelligent, pleading, met hers. In that instant, something wordless passed between them. Recognition. Not of face, but of pain. Her hands tightened on the blanket, her only warmth in the deadly night. She looked down at the frayed stars, then back at the creature whose life was slipping away, breath by frozen breath. She crawled toward him, heart thudding, and gently draped the blanket over his shivering body. The dog did not flinch. Instead, his eyes closed as if surrendering to trust for the first time in ages. Emily curled beside him, their bodies pressed together in a fragile cocoon of warmth and grief. Two castaways sharing the only shelter the world would offer each other. The dog exhaled softly. Emily matched his rhythm, eyes, fluttering, closed. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Morning came without warmth. The pale winter sun slipped between buildings, scattering its light like a broken promise. Emily stirred beneath the shared blanket, startled by the unfamiliar sensation of heat against her side. Her eyes fluttered open, landing on the massive form curled protectively around her. The German shepherd was still alive, his body coiled between her and the brittle morning air. He had moved in the night, inching closer, seeking her warmth as much as offering his own. Beneath the thin fabric, their breath had mingled, creating a tiny world untouched by frost. Emily watched his chest rise and fall, each breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Relief swelled in her chest like light cracking through darkness. The dog's eyes opened slowly, less clouded than before. They met hers without fear, only calm. Then with effort he raised his head and nudged her cheek with his cold nose, a soft, deliberate gesture. Not demand, not desperation. Something gentler. A thank you, perhaps. Emily's hand moved trembling as it reached for him. Her fingers brushed his coarse fur. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch, solid and real and warm. A shiver ran through her, not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. The feeling was unfamiliar, heavy and light at the same time. Connection. The dog let out a sigh, deep and weary, and rested his head on her lap. Emily sat perfectly still, barely breathing. Her fingers gently combed through the matted fur. No one had touched her with this kind of trust in months. Not since that night. Not since she had screamed for her parents, her voice cracking against the flames and being swallowed by sirens. You need a name, she thought, though her lips never moved. Her mind searched, running its fingers over possibilities until one caught shadow. Because he had emerged from darkness, and because somehow she knew he would never leave her side again. Hunger drove them from the alley. Emily's stomach groaned with sharp emptiness. She hadn't eaten since a half sandwich pulled from a trash can the day before. She suspected the dog Shadow, as she now called him, had gone longer. Yet he walked beside her without complaint, his steps steady despite his limp, his body always between her and the world. They made their way to a crowded subway entrance near Herald Square. People surged past, eyes down, earbuds in. The city's rhythm churned on, indifferent to the ragged child and her gaunt protector. Emily knew this kind of invisibility. It kept her safe, and yet today it felt like suffocation. She had to try something. Hesitantly, she began to sing. Her voice, fragile from disuse, wove a soft melody into the noisy air. "You are my sunshine." The song her father had played on guitar in the quiet before bedtime, when the world had still made sense. It cracked in places, caught on grief, but she kept going. The tune floated between footsteps and train rumble. At first, no one noticed. Then Shadow sat up straighter beside her. He lifted his head, ears pricked, posture alert. When someone walked too close, he gave a soft, melodic whine, not a threat, but an invitation to notice. One man paused. Shadow held his gaze, then looked at Emily, then back again. The man blinked, reached into his coat, and dropped a crumpled bill beside her. "Get some food, kid," he muttered, then disappeared. More people began to stop. Not many, but enough. By sundown, they had nearly $30 a fortune in Emily's world. More than food, it was dignity, hope. Across the street, Margaret Caldwell watched from a cafe window, her untouched coffee cooling in her hands. She wasn't drawn to the girl's song, though it cut through the urban noise with haunting purity, but to the dog. The way he moved, the way he watched. That dog wasn't a stray. He was trained. And for a moment, Margaret's heart skipped. She knew those movements, and she needed to know more. Margaret lingered in the cafe doorway, unsure of what had drawn her so completely. The child was heartbreakingly young, dirt smudged across her cheeks, her small voice weaving song like memory. But it was the dog, his posture, his timing, his presence that stirred something buried. He reminded her of another German shepherd, one she'd trained years ago. The precision, the awareness, the grace. This wasn't coincidence. She stepped outside, determined to get a closer look. But by the time she crossed the street, the girl and dog had vanished into the city's endless folds. That night, the cold turned crueler. The weather report glared from an electronics store window, record-breaking temperatures. Emily's cough rattled in her chest like broken glass. Shadow pressed closer to her side beneath an awning, his warmth the only barrier between her and the dark bite of the wind. She needed help. They both did. With courage born of necessity, Emily returned to the subway entrance the next evening. She sang again, her voice thinner now, but steady. Shadow resumed his silent performance, sitting upright, watching passers-by with intent. A few coins clinked into her cup. Not enough. Not yet. Emily didn't see the three boys watching from across the street. They saw the coins, saw her, saw weakness. By the time Emily gave up, she had just over $15. She turned down a dark alley heading toward a 24-hour diner that sometimes gave her leftovers. Shadow followed close. They were halfway through when a voice slithered from the shadows. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Three young men stepped forward, hard eyes, cold smirks. "We saw you collecting today," one said. "Pretty good take for a kid." Shadow stepped in front of her, growl rising like thunder beneath skin. "Call off your mutt," another warned, hands hidden in his coat. "We just want to talk." Emily backed up slowly, clutching the money in one hand and her blanket in the other. She didn't speak, but her refusal echoed louder than words. A knife flashed. Shadow's growl deepened. His body tensed like a drawn bow. And then the world exploded. Everything happened at once. The moment the knife gleamed, Shadow launched forward with a force that shattered the stillness. He clamped down on the attacker's wrist, precise and unrelenting. The man screamed high and raw as the knife clattered to the pavement. Emily stood frozen, heart pounding like a drum. Shadow didn't let go. Even as another youth kicked him hard in the ribs, he held his grip, dragging the first boy backward away from Emily. Another blow landed. Shadow staggered, but did not release. "Get it off! Get it off!" the attacker shrieked. A final shove, and all three men fled into the shadows, swearing and limping, one bleeding, all rattled. Only when they were gone did Shadow release his grip, panting blood, dotting his muzzle. He turned to Emily and nudged her leg gently, but she saw it instantly. He was hurt. He favored one side. His breathing hitched, his eyes dimmed. She dropped beside him, her hands hovering over his trembling frame, afraid to touch, afraid to see how bad it really was. That night she stayed awake, cradling his head on her lap, inside the shelter of an abandoned storefront. She tore a strip from her own shirt to clean his face, using her blanket as a cushion beneath him. Snow drifted silently through the broken window. Shadow whimpered with every breath, and still he stayed close. When morning light broke through the clouds, a shadow passed across the storefront. "Oh my God," a voice said. Emily jerked around, putting her body between Shadow and the threat. It was a woman, older, silver-haired eyes, wide with concern. "Margaret, it's you," she whispered. "I've been looking." She saw the way Emily tensed. So Margaret crouched down, her movements deliberate and slow. "The dog is hurt," she said gently. "I can help. I know how." Emily didn't answer, but she didn't run. That was enough. Margaret's voice stayed low, her movements calm. "My name is Margaret Caldwell. I used to train dogs police service rescue for over 30 years. I know his kind. He's been trained. He's not just a stray." As if in agreement, the German shepherd stirred at the sound of her voice. One ear twitched. He didn't growl. He listened. That small gesture was enough to shift something in Emily. Shadow had never been wrong about people. Margaret gently extended her hand. "I'm not here to take him from you," she said, reading the silent terror in Emily's eyes. "But he needs help. And I know someone who can give it, no questions asked." Emily still didn't speak, but her trembling hands moved with purpose. She wrapped the tattered blanket around Shadow's battered body. Then she looked at Margaret, her eyes wide with unspoken trust. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly. They reached the clinic in under an hour. Emily sat rigid in the corner, while Dr. Wells examined Shadow. Margaret stayed nearby, translating the vet's words into soft, simple explanations. 2 broken ribs, the vet said, fingers probing gently. But no internal bleeding. Malnourished, dehydrated, but he's strong. He wants to live. The vet glanced at Emily. Someone's been taking good care of him. Emily didn't respond, but her hand never left Shadow's side. "He has older injuries too," the vet added. "Fractures that healed wrong. Not abuse, more like a fall, maybe even part of a rescue gone wrong. He's been through hell." When the exam was over, Dr. Wells knelt before Emily. "He's going to be okay," she said gently. "He needs rest, food, and warmth, and he needs you close." Emily nodded. Margaret leaned forward. "Emily, I live on a farm just outside the city. Dogs, space, quiet. It's temporary, just until he heals. There's room for you too if you want." Emily's eyes flickered toward Shadow, who lay quietly beneath the vet's gentle hands. He needed her, and for the first time in a long time, she had somewhere to go. The drive to Margaret's farm felt like leaving one world behind. Emily sat in silence, watching the city blur into trees and fields. Snow blanketed the countryside in quiet white softness. Margaret said little, sensing the weight of everything Emily carried. The farmhouse was simple, old, but warm. Photographs lined the walls. Dogs in uniform, dogs in ribbons. Dogs standing proud beside smiling handlers. Emily followed Margaret up a creaking staircase to a small bedroom filled with unfamiliar things. Clean towels, a patchwork quilt, clothes that looked like they might fit. "You can lock the door if you want," Margaret said gently. "Or not. I'll knock either way." When Margaret left, Emily explored. The bathroom had hot water, real soap, a mirror that didn't lie. Slowly she peeled off her layers and stepped into the warmth. The lavender scent felt like a different life. Later, in borrowed clothes, she crept downstairs. The scent of chicken soup curled through the kitchen. Margaret ladled a bowl without comment, sliding it across the island. "Nothing fancy. Easy on the stomach," she said. Emily ate slowly, mechanically, savoring each bite, as though it might vanish. "Dr. Wells says Shadow's stable," Margaret offered gently. "He ate, drank. We can bring him home tomorrow." Relief flickered across Emily's face, followed by something deeper. Gratitude. That night, the bed felt too soft, the silence too wide. She woke gasping from dreams of fire and smoke, reaching for Shadow and finding only air. A soft knock. Margaret's voice low. "I heard, may I come in?" Emily didn't answer, but the door opened slowly. "Nightmares?" Margaret asked. Emily nodded, knees drawn to her chest. Margaret crossed the room, not to comfort but to witness. She sat in the corner chair, a quiet presence. Sometimes it helps just to know someone's there. And so she stayed. No platitudes, no pressure, just silence. And the sound of a house that didn't burn. Emily drifted back to sleep with Margaret's silhouette watching over her, just like Shadow would have done. In the days that followed, life began to move at a gentler rhythm. Shadow came home, his ribs-wrapped movements slow but steady. Margaret had prepared a space for him near the mudroom, warm, quiet, filled with soft bedding. Emily stayed close by, keeping vigil, her small hand often resting lightly on his back as he slept. Margaret never pushed. She offered tasks, not questions. Emily responded with nods, the occasional glance, and eventually with action. She began helping, refilling water bowls, holding brushes, walking alongside Margaret as she trained the other dogs. Her silence spoke clearly. She wanted to belong. Shadow healed with her. His coat regained its shine. His eyes, always alert, began to soften with rest. By the 5th week, he stood at Emily's side without wobbling. He moved like he had always belonged there. Margaret watched from a distance, careful not to disturb the fragile trust growing between them. She saw the way Emily leaned into the routine, how she watched every command Margaret gave, how her hands had learned to groom with care, not fear. The other dogs, each with their own wounds and stories, welcomed Emily into the pack, as if they knew she belonged among survivors. Winter thawed. March arrived with the first hints of green beneath the snow. Emily now wore a winter coat that fit, boots that didn't leak, and gloves with intact fingers, all gifts that had appeared quietly, without announcement. One morning, she found a stuffed German shepherd on her pillow, a twin to Shadow. She hugged it tightly that night, facing sleep without fear. But even safety has its limits. One Tuesday, while preparing breakfast for the dogs, Shadow collapsed. The sound of his body hitting the tile was soft, but unmistakable. Emily turned just in time to see him sprawled awkwardly, legs splayed, sides heaving. His eyes, so full of intelligence, were clouded. A sound escaped Emily, a sharp, high-keening cry. Her first voice in weeks. Margaret dropped to the floor beside them. "Don't touch him," she warned gently. "He's in pain, he might lash out." But Shadow didn't. His eyes found Emily, recognition shining faintly through the haze. His tail thumped once against the floor. Even now he was reassuring her. Dr. Wells arrived within minutes, gravel spraying as her SUV skidded into the drive. The examination took place right there on the kitchen floor. Emily stayed beside Shadow's head, one hand resting on his fur, the other trembling at her side. His heartbeat fluttered under her fingers too fast, too shallow. He needs tests, now Dr. Wells said grimly. Neurological symptoms. Could be trauma, or something worse. Emily climbed into the back of Margaret's car, without hesitation, refusing to leave Shadow's side. At the clinic, she watched as he disappeared behind closed doors. Hours dragged. She didn't cry, but her hands twisted her sweater until it puckered and stretched. Margaret sat beside her, silent, steady. Dr. Wells returned at last, holding scans and answers neither of them wanted. "There's a mass," she said, pointing to a shadow on the image. "Likely a meningioma, a tumor pressing on his brain. Probably linked to old trauma. It's operable, but risky and expensive." Margaret's jaw tightened. "How long do we have?" "Days. Maybe less if it grows. Surgery could save him, but without it." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Emily pulled out a handful of crumpled bills, the remnants of her subway singing, and placed them on the table. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. But the look in her eyes said, "Everything I'll give you, all I have." Dr. Wells gave a soft smile and gently pushed the money back. "Let's talk about options first." That night, Margaret sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and bank statements. Emily hovered in the doorway, silent until Margaret looked up. "I won't give up," Margaret said. "But I don't have that kind of money just lying around. I'll try a loan, sell equipment, something. I just wanted you to know the truth." Emily disappeared briefly, then returned holding her most precious thing, the star blanket from her mother. She laid it on the table with reverence. Margaret's eyes filled. "Oh, sweetheart. No, that's yours. That's home." Then she paused. "Wait," she whispered. "Maybe there's another way." Margaret's mind raced. "We tell his story," she said, eyes alight with sudden hope. "People care about dogs like shadow therapy dogs, hero dogs. If we show them what he's been through, someone will help." The next morning, she called in favors. Linda and Robert, her neighbors, helped set up an online fundraiser. "Save Shadow Hero Dog Needs Your Help." Margaret carefully worded the story, shielding Emily's identity, while spotlighting Shadow's bravery and potential. Donations trickled in, then dozens, then hundreds. The page spread across dog training forums, rescue networks, and social media. Within days, they had raised nearly 40% of the goal. Still not enough. Then came the unexpected call from Dr. Wells. "I found something," she said. "A microchip. Old military grade. It was buried deep, partially damaged. That's why we missed it before." Emily and Margaret raced to the clinic. "We recovered a partial ID. I've sent it to the national database. If we're lucky." They didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Margaret got the call. She turned to Emily, her face a mixture of awe and disbelief. Shadow isn't just trained. He was a fire rescue dog with the New York Fire Department. He went missing during an apartment fire 8 months ago. Emily's breath caught. 8 months ago. The fire. Her fire. Margaret continued gently. "His handler, James Mitchell, is on his way. He's coming to see if it's really his partner." Emily couldn't speak. Her mind swam with the impossible connection. Had Shadow Ranger been there that night? Had he tried to save her family? The weight of that possibility sat heavy in her chest. Not pain, not fear. Something deeper. Something sacred. Their bond hadn't been random. It had been fate. The following afternoon, James Mitchell stepped out of his truck, wearing an FDNY jacket and a look of hopeful doubt. Emily watched from behind the curtains, her body stiff with dread. Margaret had warned her gently, if Shadow truly was Ranger, his handler would have legal claim, and Emily knew how the world worked. Nothing good stayed. Mitchell entered the mudroom. "Ranger," he whispered. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching. At the sound of a familiar whistle, his tail began to wag. Slowly, shakily, he rose and limped toward the man. Mitchell dropped to his knees. "It's you," he said, voice thick. "It's really you." The reunion was gentle, reverent. Emily couldn't watch. She stepped out into the cold, tears hot against her cheeks. Not again. Not this. Inside, the conversation shifted. Dr. Wells explained Shadow's condition and the cost of surgery. Mitchell nodded gravely. "He's a fallen hero at our station. They'll help how they can, but budgets are tight. My apartment. It's no place for a dog in recovery. I work 24-hour shifts." Margaret showed him the fundraiser and the progress they'd made. The update about Shadow's true identity had sparked a surge in donations, but they were still short. Before anyone could speak again, a sharp knock came at the door. A man in a pressed suit stepped inside, leather folder under his arm. "Margaret Caldwell," he asked crisply. "Department of Child Protective Services." Emily froze as the man's eyes locked onto her. "We've received an anonymous report," he said. "This child, Emily Morgan, was reported missing from the Hardens foster home 5 months ago. She is to be placed in emergency protective custody." Margaret stepped forward firm. "She's my guest. She came to me for help. She hasn't spoken, hasn't told me who she was. I was trying to do what was right." The man's smile was thin. "Be that as it may, the law is clear." He stepped toward Emily. That's when Shadow, weak but aware, rose from his bed and growled. Low, warning, protective. Emily shrank back, her face white with fear. "Not again. Not without a fight." Shadow's growl stopped the man mid-step. Emily, trembling, pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow. Shadow stood between her and the official, his weakened frame trembling, but unyielding. "Easy," Margaret said, stepping between them. "You will not lay a hand on her." "Not like this. I'm within my authority," the man replied, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "I'm authorized to place her in protective custody immediately." "Then you'll wait while I call my attorney," Margaret countered. "She deserves an advocate, and so does he," she added, nodding toward Shadow. The tension was thick, but something shifted. The man didn't advance. Margaret's calm fire had halted him. The standoff broke with the arrival of Dr. Wells, who offered documentation of Emily's state and Shadow's condition. And Mitchell, voice steady, hands clenched, spoke up. "I've seen enough systems fail kids like her," he said. "Maybe it's time someone broke the pattern." The official left that day, empty-handed, but not unchanged. Legal proceedings would follow. Paperwork, hearings. But Emily wasn't taken. Not that night. Not from the only home she had started to trust. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and hope. Donations surged. Shadow's story, his rescue work, his loyalty, his bond with Emily touched hearts across the country. A retired firefighter's wife organized a community auction. A therapy dog network pledged a grant. Margaret sold some unused equipment. Mitchell's firehouse passed the helmet around. In just over a week, they had enough. The surgery was long and difficult. Emily waited the entire time, Margaret by her side, the stuffed Shadow pressed tight against her chest. When Dr. Wells finally emerged, her smile was tired, but real. "He's going to make it." Weeks later, under a warm April sun, Emily sat with Shadow on the farmhouse porch. His scars were healing. So were hers. Margaret came outside with 2 envelopes, one from family court, naming her Emily's legal guardian, the other from the FDNY offering Shadow an honorary retirement. Emily read the letters silently, then leaned into Shadow, her hand resting over his steady heartbeat. They had both been lost. Now they were found. Together.